Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 32nd year, yes, you heard that right, 32nd year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they might be planning for the future. We do have a slightly wider net than writers, however. We have had on musicians, we've had on 2 or 3 sculptors, we've had on painters. So if you have an idea for an artist who might be a good fit for the Writer's Block, a writer or other brand of artist, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to add that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming that's produced by 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television. It's a wonderful community service that you don't get with Dish or other ways to access the visual media. So you stick with the Writer's Block, stick with cable. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we do have a writer and a producer of a book who planned the book. They are Carla Grillo and Howard Frisch, and they have produced a wonderful book about Gloucester and about some of Gloucester's seniors in oral interviews transposed to this wonderful book called The Past is a Present. Carla and Howard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having us.
I'm glad you could make it. And congratulations on this book, which is about to appear in early 2022. Now, first, I want to find out how this book got started. And Howard, can you speak to that?
Yes, we have a monthly newsletter at the Rose Baker Senior Center, which is mailed to all senior residents here in Gloucester. At one of the board meetings of the Friends of the Gloucester Council on Aging, Carla, who's a director, came to us with an idea. She wanted to publish a monthly article featuring one senior about their history, how they, what they did in Gloucester, their family, and it was a good idea. We thought it would last just a few months, but we said let's go ahead with it. And 28 versions were later, over almost 3 years. It was published monthly, and now we're going to put it into a book. But it was Carla came up with the original idea, was the first one to interview people, and then sought out other people for some of the interviews.
So you got this idea from the board and from Howard, and you ran with it.
Well, backtracking a little bit.
Sure.
My mother, Madeline Grillo, who was a school teacher here for many years, something like 38 years at Gloucester High School, an English teacher. She, on her 95th birthday, I wanted to surprise her. And I said to my sister, I want to write a story about her life while she's still living. No one can read their own obituary. That was my running line. So I took a good chunk of time, wrote her life story without her knowledge, and then called up the wonderful Ray Lamont. Remember Ray, the publisher of Gloucester Daily Times? Called him up, and he knew immediately who my mother was. And I said, Ray, I'd like you to run with this in the paper for her birthday. I called up the old publisher of The Beacon, Jane Fosbury Enos. She did the same thing. She ran with it. And then my mother's alma mater, Emerson College, had it on the front of their website for months after this.
And when was that? What year was that?
This would have been 2014 that she was 95. She lived until 97. She had Parkinson's, so we knew she wasn't going to be around much longer.
So before the book idea came around, you had essentially done one of the...
Oh, that's how I got the idea.
One of the interviews. That's how you got the idea.
Once I went into her bedroom on the morning of her birthday and read it to her, because she was legally blind at the time. I read it to her, and the whole family was there. Everyone was in tears. And I said, whoa, I have something here.
Yes.
And so once it was done, I wasn't even on the board at that point, but I had joined the Friends. And I had in the back of my mind, I went, this is a great idea. And the senior center had done such wonderful things for my mother while she had Parkinson's. For example, they sent a lovely woman who taught her how to do yoga in her chair. And so I figured this is payback time. I'm willing to dedicate X
Good.
amount of my time to
Good.
do it. The board loved the idea.
So I want to make sure our audience understands, this is the board of the Friends of the Council,
Gloucester Council on
Gloucester
Aging.
Council, the
Yes.
Yes.
Friends, so there's no confusion about the council itself. It's Friends of the Gloucester Council on Aging. And we're going to put up now, I'm going to ask our director, Becky Coyle, to put up now a sign saying both the website and
Oh,
that
good.
books can be pre-ordered
Sure.
right now. That'll go up. I'm going to give Becky plenty of time to hear that and put that up so that our audience knows, if they haven't figured it out yet, that they can order this book.
Yes.
And it'll be out in early 2022. I can't believe I'm talking about 2022.
I know.
2022. So tell me how long it took before, or since you got the idea and the book, say it comes out in February. Just say.
We've been at this for 5 years.
So it
Because we
started.
planned it,
It started in
4 months of
2000.
planning.
When did it start? The first one?
First one was, oh, God love Lois Stillman. She was our guinea pig, the proverbial guinea pig, the first one we did.
And what year was that?
That was done
16?
in June of 2017.
17.
We started planning as a board every month. We planned this as of November of 2016, but we didn't go live with the first one until the following June. And then from June 2017 until the last one was December of 2019, and that was my mother's.
That's
in-
gathering.
Yeah.
Gathering all the memoirs.
Yep.
So say it comes out before June in 2022, that will be 5 years.
Yep.
That's a long haul. I want to ask you some nuts and bolts questions. When you went to interview people, we were talking about this before the show, permission.
Yes.
You have to make sure that you have permission that you can use that person's. Tell us about that process, Howard.
Well, we knew we had to get a disclosure from each person saying that we were allowed to use their information, and we had everyone sign forms allowing us to use their information. And we also, Carla also went back and got approval from the local archives here in Gloucester, from, it was the, I'm sure I forget the others, the museum.
Oh, Cape Ann Museum has been, whatever imagery, for example, they're letting us use a wonderful photograph of Rose Baker, but we needed their permission. That's what's taken a lot of time. In addition to the over 500 hours of interview time, we have incredible photographs. Little anecdote, which Howard loves to hear and tell. When we first started doing this, no one knew how it was going to be taken at the senior center. Maybe it would just be 2 or 3 months. Maybe it would just be a wash. But we realized after the first 2 or 3 months, there was a buzz around the senior center. People were really getting into this, and it came out the first of every month. And so I was there a couple times. People were saying, who's this month? Who's going to be profiled?
You knew you had a hit on your hands.
We knew we had a hit, but even more importantly, it was turning whoever that month's person was being profiled into a celebrity. People were asking them for their photographs, and not just at the senior center. People told me they'd be around town, and someone would come up and say, would you sign my newsletter? So it was very cool. You know,
So I want to ask both of you, how did you decide which people would get in the book? And did all those people work out, or did you have to have a B team?
Well, we wanted to interview people who were members of who visited the Rose Baker Senior Center. And some people, surprisingly, didn't want their information published.
they didn't want to do it.
I think, yeah, that's why we always get permission for this
Sure.
show, because the odds are that it'll be okay with everybody except one or two people who
Yeah.
don't want anyone to know where they are or something. They
Yeah.
have their own reasons, and
right.
it's fine. So you have to respect that.
Yeah.
Right, and after my article came out, when I walked through the lobby, I can't tell you how many people said, "Gee, I didn't know that about you.
Absolutely.
You really did that?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you look so wonderful in the photographs. We never saw a picture of your wife. Your family looks great. Good to see you." I mean, it was like I'm a celebrity walking through just to
Absolutely.
go to a meeting at the senior center.
Now,
But-
you mentioned before we went on the air that you met somebody, because this is the writer's block, you met a very prominent writer, and you mentioned him in the book.
Yes, when I would join the University Collegian at the University of Massachusetts, my freshman year, I went into them and said, "Listen, I'd like to volunteer for something on the newspaper." And they said, "Well, can you write?" "No, I'm an accountant." Can you edit?" "No, I can't." "Can you take a picture?" "Yes." I became the third assistant photographer of the University of Massachusetts Collegian. And so I took some still photographs in October, November, December. Then we came back after the winter break, and the first photographer flunked out. The second assistant photographer broke his leg,
Yep.
and Howard Frisch, the third assistant photographer, was around. So Robert Frost was speaking that week, and they asked me to take a picture of him down on the first floor of the Student Union. So I was in awe of Robert Frost because we had read his poems in the first semester. So I brought this big Leica camera, single reflex, about this big, with a huge 4x5 inch video that goes in the middle. I opened the door, walked in, and there were seats on either side, and a path down the middle, and Robert Frost was at the lectern. And I was so in awe watching Robert Frost, I tripped over the cord on the floor, broke the camera, and so I'm on the floor embarrassed, and Robert Frost said, "Young man, that's not the best angle to take my picture from," which only made me more infuriated. So I gathered the parts, went back upstairs, brought another camera down, a single-length reflex, and the shutter wouldn't work. So after that, I just sat and watched the rest of the
So
program.
you were a victim of his humor.
Right, but next week I was taken off that program, and I was assigned to selling advertising locally, so I couldn't break anything. But it was.
Well, I admire your honesty. You could say, Robert Frost and I, we were great friends.
It's a long time ago, and I'm still embarrassed to say I was on that floor looking up to him.
I love that story.
Carla, you mentioned a couple people in the book that you
Yes.
wanted to mention and
Yes.
talk about on air. Can
Yes.
you tell us about
Sure.
those individuals?
Sure. There are two people. One person, I think everyone locally knows him because he owns the icon of a restaurant here, the Gloucester House. It's Michael Inquada. He is the oldest man that I interviewed. Just think about this. There are a number of people that are in this book that lived in the 1920s. And talk about being able to give us just incredible stories.
Can you give us who is the oldest and who is the youngest?
Sure. Mike is the oldest man, he's 96. The oldest woman and the oldest of all of them is Barbara Maddox. She's 97, she was born in 1924.
Right.
And she has lived by herself. She would be in the, I met her through the wonderful, inimitable Junie Van Dyke, who runs the Senior Center Art program. Barbara would be every Monday morning at Junie's art program.
Who was the youngest?
The youngest was 74 years old at the time. And that was, I believe, she's on your staff, Jennifer Levitz.
Jennifer Levin.
Yeah, Levitz,
Levitz.
yes.
I'm not-
Videographer?
Perhaps.
Yeah,
I'm
on
only,
1623.
Yes,
I'm only an independent. Becky Coyle's nodding.
Yes.
I'm only a outside producer. I don't know the entire staff, but
Yeah.
Becky said yes.
She was the youngest.
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you with that
Sure.
question.
Sure,
Go ahead with the
sure.
person you were speaking about.
So Mike's is I won't read the whole thing. Not only is he the oldest man, but he has voluminous information and stories. He was probably one of the better prepared people because he would just hand me information. But as I knew, what struck me about Mike's story was the fact that he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. So what I'd like to do is just read, with your permission.
Please do.
Again, I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read the lead-in to his story, and then I'll read his verbatim description of being captured, because he was a prisoner of war.
Okay.
During the
This is Mike Linquata.
This is Mike Linquata. Would you like to show his photograph?
Thank you for reminding me.
Here he is.
I have the old age problem of forgetting. I'm going to hold this up for Becky to
that camera.
zero in on. She's on the central camera, and I'm going to hold it up as steady as I can. Oh, we've moved out to the other camera, as steady as I can. This is Mike Linquata, a beautiful picture taken down on the waterfront.
The waterfront at the Gloucester House. That's
At
the
the Gloucester
back,
House, of course.
the beautiful
I want
wharf
to make sure
view.
that Becky has plenty of time to get that.
And this
And I'll
is
see if
taken, by the way, our contemporary photography was done by the incredible photographer, local photographer, Bill Sumner.
Bill Summer.
And he spent all of COVID for 2 years meeting with seniors down on the boulevard, socially distancing. And if the seniors couldn't make it down to the boulevard, then he would go. There were probably 8 or 9 people that he met at private venues. And that was privately meeting with Mike and his family down at the Gloucester House
Good.
last
Good.
October.
He deserves a plug.
He does.
So-
He definitely does.
Let us hear what Mike had to say.
Sure. He was only 19 years old when he crossed the Atlantic in October 1944 on the Queen Mary, used as a troop ship during World War II, departing from New York City and arriving 5.5 days later at Firth of Forth, Scotland. Gloucester native Mike Linquata and 13,000 other American troops, along with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, were aboard the ship. As Mike tells it, the troops were able to see Churchill disembark at Scotland, and when they all gave him a big cheer, Winnie turned around and saluted them with a V for Victory sign. This was the beginning of Mike's profound 22-month World War II journey that left an indelible imprint on his now 96-year-old and still counting life. So, the following is from Mike's description of his prisoner of war experience as an Army combat medic during the Battle of the Bulge, only 6 weeks after his arrival on the Queen Mary. In January 1945, while tending to 20 wounded men, again he was a combat medic, in the fields of Marville, Belgium, about 2 miles southeast of Bastogne, after his unit had completely evacuated, Mike chose to surrender to German forces rather than risk losing his wounded comrades to mortar attacks and the frigid weather. As he walked up a steep hill to surrender to the German officers, Mike distinctly remembers having, quote, an out-of-body experience. He recalls watching himself from above, observing every movement his body was making. He said, "I was prepared for the worst-case scenario." He remained a prisoner of war in 2 different detention camps for 3 months during the brutal German winter. The temperature consistently below freezing for over a month. Europe's coldest winter in 40 years. After arriving with an estimated 1,000 POWs at the Bad Orb Stalag 9B POW camp, he remained there for 42 days. Mike was sent to a large detention room that housed 300 other POWs. Sanitary conditions were toxic. There was only one sink for the 300 men and a hole in the center of the floor for a toilet. Mike says, quote, "I wore the same clothes for 3 months. There were no facilities to wash them. I was allowed 1 shower the entire time. Lice crawled around us throughout the night as we slept on the floor. Food provisions were inhuman. A cup of watered-down coffee for breakfast, putrid potato soup for lunch, and a slice of stale German black bread for supper. The Germans provided no medical care. Mike and another medic were the only source of medical aid. Mike learned there was a, quote, Massachusetts club upon arrival at Bad Orb, and he befriended a severely ill boy from Lanesville who died a few days later from malnutrition. I remember thinking at the time, Mike says, that he was one of the lucky ones. The Army notified Mike's parents, excuse me, he was missing in action, a status he retained for the 88 days of his captivity. He still has the original Western Union telegram addressed to his mother, Ann Linquata. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Private Michael L. Linquata, has been reported missing in action since 5th of January in Belgium. If further details or other information are received, you will be promptly notified. Signed the Assistant General. When he was liberated on April 2nd, 1945, Mike had lost more than 50 pounds, about 1/3 of his total body weight. A month later, an emaciated yet grateful Mike Linquata received a hero's welcome back in his hometown of Gloucester.
That's an amazing passage. Thank you for sharing that. I was thinking while you were reading about these horrible conditions, they of course did not know that the war is about to end. They didn't have that hope out there.
They didn't.
They must have survived with some sort of hope, but they didn't know that the war was almost over.
3 months.
I want to bring Howard in on some.
And Michael also shared this story at the Rotary Club. He told it many times. In June, when the D-Day was started, he would tell his story about how he survived the prison camp in Germany.
It's a good story. It's a
Wonderful.
good story.
Yeah.
And it's important that these things, these treasures, these local treasures are not forgotten. I want to ask, because you're the chair of the Friends of the Gloucester
Yes.
Council on Aging. How did the board, the other members of the board, participate in the production of the book? And who are all the 28? I wonder if you could name those for us.
Well,
There's the 28.
the 28 people, Lois Teddy Parson, Stillman, Barbara Maddox, Ida Paco Spinola, Mary Rhinelander, McCall, Connie Trosi, Florence Parisi Martin, and Natalie Pinto Daly, Louise Sella Corliss, Bob Quinn, Jenny Randazzo Parisi, Bob McKechnie, Grace Mizuraka Favaza, Ron Gilson, Mike Linquata, George Gid Loring, Barbara Ricker Eden, Marie Mulafoglia, Frank Paco Stewart, Gonzalo Verdugo, Jamila McCurdy, Barbara Main, Bill Sumner, Jennifer Lee Levitz, who we mentioned before, Aronson, Robert Bob Ryan, Junie Van Dyke, Howard Frisch, Rose Baker, and Madeline Grillo.
Yep,
Those are the 28 people.
that's the 28.
It's an impressive group. I know many of those.
Yep.
Individuals. Did other members of the board participate and do little tasks in putting the book together?
Absolutely.
Whenever she came to us and needed some support, either moral support for continuing the project or request for a check to get something printed or for the photographer or the editor, we supplied all the finances and the moral support to keep the program running for almost 4 years.
Yep.
So it was a long run, but
It was.
we believe in something, obstacles that you see when you lose sight of your objective. We knew this was going to be well received, and we just encouraged her to keep it going for all this
Yeah.
time.
We also had contributing writers. Judy Van Dyke did 4 or 5 of them. She actually wrote the one on herself with her daughter. Frank Bellini, who's on our board, helped out with 2 of them. And Carol Palazzolo, who had been on our board, did one as well.
And you mentioned Jennifer a couple of times.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it just dawned on me who she was, because I was hearing Jeannie, and I don't know why, because I'm in this group too. So I screwed up the name, but of course Jennifer Levitz, I do know.
But
yes,
the board of directors consisted of Frank Bellini, his wife Cindy Bellini, Bob Ryan, Frank Stewart, myself, Carla, Richard,
Dick Curran,
Lucy
Lucy Sheehan,
Leanne Kennedy. So that was primarily
Yeah.
the board members. And most of the board members have been there for at least 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm completing my 32nd year being on the board.
Well, how many?
32.
So you started the same year the writer's block started,
Interesting.
a couple of decades ago.
Wow.
3 decades ago, yeah. We're getting close to our deadline,
Oh,
you
my
can see
goodness.
from our
How time
nice
passes
digital.
quickly.
It does. Are all the materials on tape? And where are the tapes and where are the photographs that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah. You mean from the interviews?
Yes.
Some of the interviews were on tape. It depended upon how I conducted the interviews.
Okay.
Some of them, it was just easier listening to the person and taking notes.
Oh, I want to ask Becky, while we're talking at this last minute, if she can put up the poster again
Oh, yes.
about pre-ordering
Thank
the
you.
book. And now continue that, we can talk
Sure.
underneath that,
Absolutely.
underneath that graphic.
Thank you for promoting our lovely project. But yeah, so I do have some that were taped, but not all of them. And you know, the whole process was iterative. Some people I would be done after, there would always be a minimum of 3 interviews. Some people I had to go back and interview 5, 6, 7 times. But it was, and also the original newsletter interviews that were published in the newsletter. Those have been enhanced for the book, both in terms of the interview, people were re-interviewed. So we have lengthier written portions, and the photography is just much more
If
expansive.
someone can get all of that by ordering the book and getting one of the first copies to come off
Bingo.
the press.
You got it.
Thank you very much, Carla Grillo, and
Thank
thank
you,
you very
John.
much, Howard Frisch, for being on the Writer's Block. I really appreciate you sharing your time on this wonderful project. I very much looking forward to the book.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, John.
I want to thank all our viewers in TV land too. If you've learned something about The Past is a Present, this wonderful new book that's been created by the Friends of the Council, the Friends of the Gloucester Council on the Aging, principally by the work of Howard and Carla, then the Writer's Block has done its job. I hope to see you again next time on the Writer's Block. Good night.